Continuing the study of the human life cycle, the next chapter is on pregnancy, growth, and development, and this includes development throughout our lives after we're born. Start with fertilization. An egg and sperm join. That new cell they form is called a zygote, and that's the first cell with a full set of DNA in a whole new combination that's going to grow into the new organism. Fertilization usually occurs in the uterine tube, not in the uterus itself. Estrogen causes the cervical mucus to thin prior to ovulation so that the sperm can get through more easily. After ovulation, progesterone thickens the mucus. Now, why do we not want to allow a little time for sperm to still get in there after ovulation? Because the egg doesn't actually last very long without being fertilized, and it's not very likely to get fertilized if the sperm get there after it's released. It takes them some time to swim up. The sperm can wait 3 to 5 days for the egg to show up, but the egg can't wait very long for the sperm. So typically, intercourse would need to occur before ovulation in order for the egg to get fertilized. And prostaglandin, during intercourse or just after, improves the motility to help move the semen, and it also stimulates the sperm to move. Typically, they're basically asleep, not moving, when they're in the ductus deferens. They get prostaglandin from the, which gland? Prostate, that's why it's called that. That starts them swimming, and then they're ejaculating. There are typically 200 to 600 million sperm per ejaculation. This is in humans, it varies in different species. A few hundred of them will make it to the egg. Some of those millions are not properly formed and they can't swim well enough. Some of them are destroyed by acid in the vagina. They don't make it through the mucus. Half of them that make it into the uterus are going to swim up the wrong tube, and so on. The few hundred that make it to the egg release enzymes from the acrosome to start breaking through the coating. The first one that reaches the membrane injects its nucleus, and then that stimulates the egg to release enzymes to reharden the coating, and that blocks the sperm that are still working their way through and prevents any others from getting in. So here we see some sperm working their way through the corona radiata and then the coating. And this one has connected. In addition to rehardening this coating, which is called the zona pellucida, it also stimulates meiosis II, so that we will have a half nucleus to fuse with the sperm's half nucleus. The first polar body's already up there. This is going to form the mature ovum and second polar body. This video is sea urchin, eggs and sperm on a microscope slide. Here are the eggs by themselves. They're not stained, so the nuclei don't stand out that much. They don't have a corona radiata because they're not growing in ovarian follicles the same way ours do, but they do have a zona pellucida. You can see this little kind of a clear coating around it. That wobbling is the liquid as the sperm are introduced, which you can see swimming around. Let me get the light. Here you can see some of them working their way in. And there's a little bit of another egg here that they're working on. And watch for the moment where one of them gets through. See how this is expanding outward? That's the replacement for the zona pellucida that blocks out all the rest of the sperm. And you can see that the other 2 eggs that are just off the view have also gotten fertilized. Questions on fertilization? Pregnancy is the time during which the offspring are developing in the uterus. Most mammals have this. The group called monotremes that lay eggs don't. And the marsupials that have the pouch have a much shorter pregnancy, and the very early fetus will come out the vagina and crawl into the pouch. For marsupials, except for kangaroos, there's a switch because they're upright. The opening of the pouch is at the posterior end, closer to the vagina. And their breasts are actually inside the pouch. So the babies are being fed sort of outside the mother. The development of the offspring is called the prenatal period. For humans, that is 38 weeks from conception, organized into 3 trimesters. Now, you've probably heard of 40 weeks. That is starting from the last period, which is a point that you can actually point to and say that's when this was. Ovulation is usually 2 weeks after that. So the first 2 weeks of a 40-week pregnancy, you're not actually pregnant yet. Prenatal development is in 2 major periods, embryonic and fetal. Embryonic is from fertilization to 8 weeks, and then fetal is from 8 weeks to birth. The first thing that happens is called cleavage, like cleft, which is dividing the egg. So first into 2, and then 4, I think this is about 8. During this stage, the zygote isn't growing, it's just dividing into more smaller cells and living off their cytoplasm. At about 16 cells is when we start to go into the next stage. And as it's developing, the zygote would be moving along the tube to the uterus. The next stage is called the blastocyst. Let's go ahead and get some illustrations up. The blastocyst is forming a cavity. There's an outer cell mass that looks kind of like a follicle. And then there's an inner part. The big thing that differentiates the blastocyst from the follicle is there's no egg in it. The outer cells are called the trophoblast. they're not going to be part of the baby. They're going to form part of the placenta, the amniotic sac, and things like that. It's this inner mass that will form the offspring itself. Forming the blastocyst starts around day 6 or 7, right around the same time as implantation. So across the top, in our first picture, the egg has been fertilized. We've got a zygote. Those two little nuclei next to it are the first and second polar body. In the second one, the nuclei from the egg and sperm fuse. And then going across the top is cleavage. One additional term you'll sometimes see, label this, is morula, which means blackberry. And that is the late cleavage area when we've got 16, maybe 32 cells. So that last picture may be counted as a morula. And then here's what blastocyst, sometimes called a blastula, would look like. And they've colored the inner cell mass in blue. And then they're showing where the embryo would be moving along the uterus. And here it's starting to implant. And these little fingers reaching out are part of the trophoblast. This video is going to take us through, I don't know if it's the same eggs, I don't think so because it's a different person that posted it, but we're going to follow our fertilized sea urchin eggs through early development. There's our first division. This is about 16, 17 hours in is when it really starts dividing. There's a blastocyst. Now, because the sea urchin doesn't implant in a uterus, it just has one cell mass that is going to form the offspring rather than a trophoblast and an inner mass. This next thing that's happening is the next stage called the gastrula. This actually works very differently in humans from sea urchins. This is where the embryo starts to develop into multiple layers of tissue that are going to develop into different organs. While the process of getting there is different, the rough structure of the embryo, once it finishes forming the gastrula, is going to be pretty similar. There are questions on early development before implantation? Yes?
On there, did you say the first stage, is that fertilization? And then is the zygote and the implantation?
Yeah, so in this first one, it's been fertilized, but the nuclei haven't fused yet. I think we would still consider it a zygote at that point. The second picture is where the nuclei have fused. And we actually have slides in lab of sea urchins from all these different early stages. We're going to look around on those slides and try to find each one. So, implantation starts with the outer cells or trophoblasts growing into the endometrium. So here it's first touching. Pink are the endometrial cells, or the epithelium. And as the trophoblast grows out, it actually dissolves some of the endometrium so that it's coming right into contact with the connective tissue in the uterus. The placenta is going to form from part of the trophoblast and part of the endometrium. We'll come back to the placenta as we get later in development. The gastrula is the next stage. This is where the embryo forms into three what's called germ layers. Germ as in germinal, as in it's going to give rise to things. This happens around week 2. And looking at just the embryo, not the trophoblast, there's just these 3 little sheets together. Endoderm, mesoderm, and ectoderm. Inner, middle, and outer skin, because initially they're just epithelial sheets. But these are going to fold up so that the ectoderm and mesoderm wrap around to form a tube.